at analysis of poetry in terms of grade 10 and 11, because practically we do the same thing. So we're going to look at the introductory parts of what we are expected to do, or what we are going to be doing, because we have to analyze 10 poems by the end of this year. But now we need to talk about the method of how we'll analyze those 10 poems, whether in grade 10 or 11, it's the same. And then we need to know the structure and the strategies that we're going to use. Right in front of us, there is an acronym that says SWIM. It's really easy to analyze a poem because there are certain things that you must internalize. The first S is for structure. You internalize the structure. The second one is for words, which is a W. The I is for imagery, and the M is the message of the poem. So those four are the core internal apple of the structure of the poem. And therefore, we are looking at those four things. And then when we bring them together, that's when we have what we call a poem. So we'll be coming back now and then during the year to say, what is our SWIM structure? It's this type of poem. Words used is this and that. Imagery is this and that, right? The other word for words which I might be referring to in the presentation is diction. So please, sometimes when we're talking about words, we're talking about diction. So you must be able to identify that. Sometimes when we're talking about imagery, we'll be talking about figures of speech. So that's the terminologies that will be coming up. So don't get confused to say, oh, now she's talking about diction. The diction are the words of the poem itself. All right, let's go to the basic part of introduction to poetry. For grade 10s, I know it might be challenging, but for grade 11s, this is something that you did at the beginning of grade 10, but we'll go back to it again because the majority of us, we always say, we didn't do this, we don't remember. So that is why we have such presentations whereby we'll go back and over again, we rehash what we did. Before we begin analyzing any poem or poetry, we need to understand these following concepts and vocabulary. So there are things that make parts of a poem that we must dissect first and understand so that we'll be able to identify them in the poems. The theme and the message is the first one that we'll touch on. The theme refers to the main idea or the subject of the poem. Remember, a poem is usually written about a specific topic or areas of interest. The message is the lesson that the poet conveys or communicates to the reader. So when we say the theme, we're talking about what is the content based on. And then when we're talking about the message, is what is it trying to say to us? So what is the message that is communicating to us? So that's what we call the theme and the message. The theme is derived from the content. Can't be the stanzas, can't be the lines, but definitely we must have an idea, either an overall idea or an underlying idea. It may be hidden, but it can be very clear. So we must be able to extract it and know it very well. The intention of the poem is the reason for the poet writing this poem in the first place. What is it trying to achieve? Is it to express love? Is it to criticize? Is it to educate? Is it to outline? Is it to emphasize? Is it to evoke sympathy? Is it to admire? So we must be able to do all these things, create awareness. So all these things must be out in the open to say, what is the person really trying to do when writing this poem? The style of the poem refers to the way the poet expresses himself. So as a result, when we're talking about the style of the poem, we're talking about the type of words used, which makes the style different. So when we're talking about style, when we say conversational style, we're talking about indirect, informal language being used. Don't, can't. That's colloquial. So as a result, the style is colloquial there. Conversational is almost as if it's two people that are conversing, and as a result, we're getting the question, the response, or the statement and the response, and therefore that's a conversational style. So we must be able to identify all these things when we're coming to style. We must be able to list down the different styles. We must be able to find them properly. So when we're talking about styles, there are a lot. So which means we might have to break it down and say, let's try and find out what we are talking about. And we try and pin down to say, these are the things that we are talking about when we are coming to style. For example, they've given us there conversational, they've given us technical, they've given us humorous, We're now going to bring in colloquial as well. Colloquial style is coming in when we're going there. So those are the things that you should be able to understand. We also have a lot of them. What we're talking about, humorous is also a style. So those are the things that we're talking about. So now when we're coming in and we're bringing in, we must sarcastic and so forth. So we must identify all those things. Emotive style also comes in. So those are the things that we're talking about. So right now, when we are looking at a poem, we must be able to understand that we must extract the way it has been written, and we must be able to find out what has been done and how it has been explained to us. All right, diction. Come on to diction. Diction refers to the poet's choice of words. So when we're talking about words, we're talking about words have an impact. Words are emotive. When a person uses a particular word in a conversation, that's when you understand that this one was trying to really insult me, but said it in this word. But that word has an impact on you, and you can't even forget it. So as a result, that's what we call diction. When someone is really having a presentation, and then as a result, there is that one word which keeps coming up, you must be able to know this one is making an impact in his presentation because it is saying this. So that's what we mean by diction. Diction, we take a word. When we take a word for diction, what do? We have to quote it. So we take it, that word, we quote it, and then we have to comment on it. So as a result, that's what we'll be doing when doing diction, because we are saying they carefully select each word to express their thoughts and feelings. The choice of words is closely linked to the poet's intention. Remember to consider the denotative and connotative meaning of the words used. Remember, there's a word that has a literal meaning, and then there's a word that has an underlying meaning. That's what we mean by denotative and connotative. I believe you did that some time ago in grade 9, 10, somewhere there, so you must be able to remember. Tone refers to the poet's attitude or feelings. It is used to convey his or her emotions and to set the mood of the poem. It is established through the choice of words, the imagery, or the structure of the poem. The tone can vary within a poem. When we say tone, we're talking about the way the writer or the poet has expressed himself. So as a result, when someone is going to talk about celebrations, the joy, the laughter, we now realize the tone is so light because it's so joyful. But when someone is going to talk about the carelessness of the people leaving things everywhere, and therefore expecting someone to pick it up, that is a sarcastic tone, because there's bitterness in it, whereby the person is angry to an extent. So as a result, tone can be anger, can be sadness, can be joy, can be melancholy, can be nostalgic, going back to their youthfulness, and then they make it so real. So those are the things that we mean. So now we're talking about that type of thing. There are activities that you can use that are popping up here and there to assist you in trying to understand what is this tone. For example, it says choose any 3 positive tone words unfamiliar to you and write a complete sentence using these words in your poetry book. So that's something that you can be practicing in preparation for your poetry lessons. Right. We have what we call positive tones, and we have what we call negative tones. Please don't come to us and say the tone is positive, because that is vague, very vague. Because when you say it is positive or negative, you're being vague. You must be specific. So please, let's specify. If you're saying there's positivity, be specific. What sort of positivity is it? Is it encouraging? Is it cheerful? So I've listed words for you. We've listed words for you that will help you now to understand the different types of positive tones or attitudes. So as a result, these are things that will help you now to say, I'm trying to internalize my tone. I'm trying to internalize my attitude. So as a result, amused, appreciative, brave, calm, compassionate, surprised, reverent, relaxed, proud, pleasant, playful. It's just samplers. There are so many, but this is just to give you an idea of what we expect you to do when giving us tone or attitude. You must specify. For words that you don't really know, you can even look them up And you can even find a synonym for it that you might remember, and then it will help you in the long run. Have an own compilation of adjectives that are describing tone and attitude. It will help you in the long run in the exam so that you don't have to guess. So as a result, you know them, you'll be able to identify them. So these are just samplers that are there. I mean, we have to talk about something and show you exactly what we mean. Same with negative tone. Negative tone is, or attitude is vague. So please be very specific. When someone is angry, obviously that's negative. So you can't say the poem has a negative tone. No. There is an angry tone in the poem or in stanza 1. There is a tone of outrage. You must be very clear. There is a disappointed tone. There is a furious tone. There is a disgruntled tone. So these are examples that we are talking about. So as a result, there's another activity that you can do. Choose any 3, the ones that you feel you don't know, so that you can be able to understand them and break them down, and you can use them as such and such. So as a result, they might come in handy for you. Compile them under your own notes so that you can be able to be referring to them in class and looking at a poem and say, which one is better to use here? Is it shameful? No. But this sounds so desperate. So, oh yes, it is a desperate attitude or a tone. So as a result, I hope this will help you out. It's not all of them. This is just the introductory part. So we'll be going in details as the months move by. Tone, attitude, words, humorous, ironic, sarcastic. So these are some of the humorous tones, attitudes that we have. Ironic tones or attitudes that we have. Sarcastic tones, attitudes that we have. So as a result, these tables are just there for your notes compilation. So as a result, they will help you along the road to say, when we say sarcastic, joking, but really serious. So when we say patronizing, you must be able to understand that pretends as if they know it all and the person who's talking to them doesn't. Ridiculing, then you understand that's definitely sarcasm, because this person is making fun or mocking this and that. So as a result, these are notes that can help you out. You can use them as you please. Feel free and make sure that you go all out in trying to internalize them. Same with attitudes or tones that show sorrow, fear, and anxiety. So they are broken down into different categories so that they can help you to come up with a clear picture of what you can use. So as a result, that's why they are in different forms, whereby this one shows sorrow, this one shows fear, this one shows anxiety, and it can help you along. Neutral tones. All right. Neutral is also a vague term. So we don't want you to say to us, this is a neutral tone or attitude. Those are words that are giving you, adjectives that are giving you neutrality. Clinical, detached, humble, resigned, ceremonial, pleading, nostalgic. It will help you in the long run. So as a result, please, let's go all out and try to understand these things. The mood or feeling of a poem refers to the atmosphere created by the poem. When we say mood usually when you're in a 21st party, a birthday party, the mood is happy, celebratory, because the person is coming into a new age. But when you're in a funeral, the mood is different. That's what we mean. There is sadness. There is mourning in a place of a funeral. But now when you're in a party, that's a joyful mood, that's a happy mood, that's a celebratory mood. So when you are reading the poem, try and find the environment, try and find what is happening so that you can be able to have the mood coming out. Point of view is the perspective from which you experience the poem. So you must be able to distinguish between the poet and the speaker. The poet is the writer, while the speaker is the narrator. That's the voice telling us the thoughts, feeling, or story. It can be one, but sometimes the point of view can be from 2 different angles. So you must be able to understand whether the point of view is it from the poet only, or there is a speaker also coming in, and you must be very clear on that one. Okay. Rhythm is the beat created by the sound of the words in a poem. When we're talking about rhythm, we're talking about syllables. I believe if you remember from primary school, we used to talk about that words are broken into syllables. So as a result, when we say creativity, the word is divided. There is this syllable, creativity. So as a result, syllables are the ones that determine the rhythm. There are syllables that are on a high note, and we usually see this on top of the word, but there are syllables that are in a low note, and we see this, which means they are, for example, cre is on a high note. When we say TVT, that's a low note because there's no stress there. Rhythm deals with stress of syllables. There are syllables that are heavy. There are syllables that are light. So you must be able to distinguish the two. When we say exorcism, that's a heavy syllable. So obviously it will be this. But when we say calm, that is unstressed, and therefore it is a calm rhythm. So as a result, that's what we mean when we're talking about rhythm. You must be able to find whether there is highness in a syllable, there is stress in a syllable, or there is no stress, and it will be easier for you to know the rhythm. Meter refers to the pattern of stressed or unstressed syllables. I think I've just said this, strong and weak syllables. So you must be able to find out in line 1, is it a pattern? In stanza 1, is it a pattern? In 3 lines, is it a pattern? Or there is no pattern at all? So you must be able to find that meter of stressing in the syllables, because meter is only found in rhythm. So you cannot find it anywhere else. Rhyme scheme, words that sound alike because they share the same ending vowel and consonant sounds. Now, when we're talking about rhyme scheme, we're talking about line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4. That's our first stanza. Then line 5, line 6, line 7 is a different stanza. So we come in and 8 since it's 4 lines. All right. We're always going to go, these are the lines of the poem. So when we are coming to the rhyme scheme, we're always going to look at the last word of the line. So we don't focus on everything. We focus only on the last words. For example, when we have beauty and city above liquor. Right. For example, if in our stanza 1, we have those words at the last end of each line. Beauty and city are rhyming, so we allocate words of the alphabet to it. Because there is the same rhyme scheme, this will be AA. Because beauty is rhyming with city, they share the same ending of vowel, consonant, sound. But there's no sharing with above, which means now this is a B because it's a different rhyme scheme. Liquor has no rhyme to beauty, city, above, which means it will be a C. That will be the rhyme scheme. So we're looking at the last words in each line to see if they really rhyme or they do not. If they do rhyme, it means you'll have a pattern of AA, BB, AB, AB, depending on what is there, until you continue to the next line. If, for example, this line starts with a different rhyme scheme, and then you have, what is this? Share. But then you come here and have something which above, rhyming, internal rhyme, mickle, lickle, and you have mickle there, right? Remember we had lickle, which means mickle and lickle are the same rhyme scheme, which means C will come back. But share doesn't have anything above share, which means that's a B. So that's what we mean with a rhyme scheme. We always find a pattern in the end words or end vowel words or end consonant words, and that's when you create a rhyme scheme. So which means it needs you to focus on the last words in a line of each stanza, and then you'll create a proper rhyme scheme. All right. When we come to figures of speech, we've been doing them, though we're going to go over them again because we always need to internalize them as much as possible. Right, figures of speech, there are so many. We always advise you to have a table at the beginning of each poetry section whereby you list all the figures of speech, you give the meanings or what they are, and then you give the example of your own. You can make up your own. Don't copy Google, please. You make up your own to say, I'm trying to understand my figures of speech. So as a result, that's something that will help you in the long run to say, I was able to create my own alliteration. I was able to create my own hyperbole. I was able to create my own simile. So which means you will be fine. Right. Alliteration is the repetition of the consonant sounds. So as a result, we have that consonant sound which will come out, the kr, the r, the b. So as a result, if it's repeated so many times in a line, it becomes alliteration. You have an example there. Only the stuttering rifle's rapid recall. There is it. We have the r sound coming over and over again. So as a result, the repetition of the R sound is given. And as a result, that is what we call alliteration. It's the sounds. But assonance is the repetition of the vowel sound. A, E, I, O, U. That's what we're finding as repetition. So it says no mockeries. The O is repeated there. The O is repeated there. For them, O is repeated there. O is repeated there. Nor. So as a result, the O vowel is repeated over and over again. And as a result, that becomes assonance. Onomatopoeia, words that imitate the sound that they are naming. Remember, the sound must be depicted. The bang of the door, the buzzing of the bee. So as a result, we must be seeing the repetition or the imitation of the sound there. And therefore, it will come out now. So that's what we mean by this onomatopoeia, whereby we are going to have the sound depicted. Simile, comparison of two things using like or as. Thou hast a voice whose sound was like the sea. He compares the power and voice of his voice to the powerful and loud sound of the sea. So as a result, that's from poem London 1802. Grade 10s are going to be doing it. Grade 11s, you've done it already, or you're going to do it, or whatever it is. I'm not sure. So as a result, that's some of the poems that are there in our syllabus. So as a result, if we're using comparing two things using like and as, then it's a simile. But if we have a direct comparison of two things, when you say thou has the voice whose sound was like a sea, but now in its metaphor, it will be his voice is the sea. Then we understand there's a comparison, but it didn't use like and as. So as a result, that's when now there's the difference between the simile and the metaphor. The simile uses like and as, the metaphor does not. To compare two things without the like and the as. Extended metaphor, when the metaphor continues for several lines or the entire stanza. So as a result, that's where we come in and say, oh, okay, we have this one. So as a result, which means when we say it continues for several lines or for the entire stanza, still on the same metaphor, then we call it an extended metaphor. Personification, human or life qualities to non-human objects. So as a result, that's when we say he is a wild beast. When we give those qualities of wildness and indiscipline, that's why we say he is a wild beast. So as a result, that's what we mean. So as a result, when we come in and say the cow reckled and sang as loudly as ever, the singing qualities given to the cow or the reckling given to the cow, which means that's personification. So as a result, that's what we mean. We have antithesis. When two contrasting ideas are put together to achieve a desired outcome. So as a result, when we come in and say antithesis, they are contradictory. To be or not to be, that's contradictory. It's either you are or you are not, but you can't be both. So that's what we mean by antithesis. You are easy on the eyes, but hard on the heart. Someone who's easy on the eyes is friendly, but unfortunately that person really is a close-up and therefore is not friendly. Sarcasm takes the form of an ironic remark that is rooted in humor, intended to mock or draw attention to the situation. Sarcasm is created when a speaker makes a statement that is clearly the opposite of what they feel or believe. The tone of voice indicates the sarcasm. A virgin saying, I really love killing animals for food is sarcasm, because that person does not believe in the killing of animals at all. So that's the irony in it, because they are for the campaigning of animals' lives. So that's what we mean by sarcasm. Irony, it is a literary device where a situation in which there is a contrast between expectation and reality. So the outcome is different than expected. Please pay the fare. We buy fuel from the black market. The man expects them to pay for the ride, yet he bought the fuel illegally from the black market. That's irony. If you bought it from the black market, which means it was cheaper, but you're expecting people to pay the normal fare. So that's what we don't expect. So that's why we say the outcome is different than expected. And metonymy is also a figure of speech where the substitution of one term for another. Altar, sword, and pen. Fireside is used to symbolize the army, its writers, and arms. For example, when we're talking about this, metonymy is when we talk about men. When we're talking about men in poetry and they give this word, they won't be referring to the male species, but it will be a term that refers to all humankind, whether male or female. So that's a common term when we say metonymy in poetry. So that's what we mean. All humankind is represented by that word. Hyperbole. This is an intentional exaggeration or overstatement often used for emphasis. She claims that without him, she will die. She is expressing his importance to her. That's exaggeration. So as a result, I cannot live without, no, we can live without a boy. So as a result, that is hyperbole. So as a result, that's what we mean by over-exaggeration. Rhetorical question. Questions asked not for an answer, but to make a point or emphasize an idea. The poem is always, there will be a question, but now remember, it is meant to involve us as the readers, not specifically for us to answer it, but it will involve us and engage us in thought. Enjambment. Enjambment is usually used in a free verse, if you remember. So when we say there's a free verse, that's the type of poem where we find this characteristic. This poem has continuity happening. There's agency that the poet cannot stop in one line, but continues the idea to the next line. So as a result, it's almost like there's so much agency that he cannot pause. So as a result, the continuation of a sentence or thought without a pause beyond the end of one line. So that's what we mean by enjambment. Apostrophe, a figure of speech in which a character or speaker addresses someone who is absent. So when we are talking about apostrophe, we're talking about when you address someone who's passed away, but you are bringing them alive. That's what we call apostrophe. The person is no longer there, but you call on them to come back so that they can fix things and therefore they can make things right. That's what we mean by apostrophe. Anaphora is the next one. Anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of multiple lines. When we say the at the start of all three lines of a stanza. So when we say the poet's, the stanza starts with the beginning of the sunrise, and then you continue to say the laughter of the children in the next line. And in the third line, you say the beauty of the sunset. So as a result, that the in those three lines is what we call anaphora, because it is used to start off the three sentences. Therefore, it's repetition of a phrase. So anaphora is the repetition of a word or a phrase at the beginning of multiple lines. So that's what we mean by anaphora. It's not just repetition anymore, it's anaphora. So let's be very clear on that one. So now let's go on and say, when we are analyzing a poem, we started off and saying, let's go back a little bit to our acronym that we are using to analyze poetry. Right. We said when we're analyzing a poem, think about the structure, think about the words, think about the imagery, think about the message, so that you'll be able to understand. I think we've broken down imagery, we've broken down diction, we've broken down the message. We've talked a little about the structure, so you must be clear. When we say structure of the poem, I'm going to go to structure of the poem now. Structure of the poem depends on the type of poem it is. When we're talking about structures of the poem, there are different types of poems. We have sonnets, one. whereby we have Italian sonnets and we have a Shakespearean sonnet. Two, we have odes. Three, we have lyrical poems. Four, we have narrative poems. So when we're talking about sonnets, we have different types of sonnets. A sonnet is a 14-line poem. When you say 14-line poem, it means that it only has 14 lines. It does not have stanzas. It has one stanza of 14 lines. Italian poem is divided according to line 1 to 8, 9 to 14. But a Shakespearean poet is divided according to line 1 to 12, and the second part is 13 to 14. So the sonnets always divide the poem into two, but in different ways between the Italian and what we call the Shakespearean sonnet, so they are not the same. So these are some of the types of poems that we'll be doing, and therefore we'll be dealing now with those things and saying which type of poem is this. So as a result, we must be very clear that we understand this type of poems. Then we talk about an ode next, because now when we're coming to types of poems, we must be able to separate them. When we're coming to an ode, we are talking about a poem that exalts, praises something or someone. Can be praise of nature, at the beauty of the extent of the beauty of the nature. So as a result, admiration is always going to come in an ode. So usually it comes in nature poems. Lyrical poem. A lyrical poem is a poem that expresses feelings. So when we say it expresses feelings, it conveys either the sorrow, it can convey all of these things, and as a result, the speaker's feelings are very clear. A narrative poem now is a poem that tells in the form of a story. So you must be able to understand that this is a poem in story form. I remember when I was a little child, that's what we call narrative poems, and then takes you back to their childhood, and then they bring you here again. So those are some, when we're talking about the structure, you must be able to be knowing the structure of an ode, of a lyrical poem, of a sonnet, of a narrative. So that's what we mean when we're talking about structures, because they are not the same. All right, let's go and go to how to really analyze a poem now, because we've touched on figures of speech. We've really tried to touch on the key elements and the terminologies that we're going to be using. Right, how to read a poem is where we are now. We encourage you to read the poem several times for internalization and understanding. So as a result, if you read it 3 times or so, that's when you'll be getting the idea. Is there a general idea? Is there an underlying meaning to it? So as a result, when you are reading it, that's when you'll get more understanding. The first time, you might be saying it's vague. The second time, oh, he's referring to this time. Oh, okay, he's referring to a child. So that's when you'll be getting meaning, because you are supposed to understand it to get the meaning, to get the intention, to get the message. So don't just read it in passing, read it to understand. So as a result, what is your first impression of the poem? How does it really make you feel? Is it making you feel sympathetic? Is it making you feel like crying, which means it's arousing empathy in you? Is it making you sad? Is it making you melancholic? Is it making you feel joy? So you must be able to put a feeling to it some way. What sort of poem is it? We've just talked about them. Those are some types: ballad, epic, free verse, lyric, narrative poem, elegy, or sonnet. I believe I talked about a free verse. I believe I talked about a lyrical poem. I believe I talked about a narrative poem. Let's talk about a ballad, right? A ballad is a song poem that is passed on from generation to generation. So as a result, it's a fast-moving poem, and as a result, it really gives you the pronunciation of what has passed before, but is being pushed to the next. So we come in and say, oh, these are the types of poems that we do. So when we're talking of an elegy as well, it's a lamentation or a mourning. So someone has passed away, and therefore it's an elegy whereby they are honoring someone that has died. So that's what we mean by these types of poems. We've talked about the sonnet, whereby we talked about the Shakespearean and the Italian sonnet as well. So those are some of the things that you'll be coming across as we go in. Does the poet use rhyme scheme? Remember, we talked about rhyme scheme, whereby we're talking about the A, B, A, B, A, A. That's the rhyme scheme. What is it? Which means if you must identify it, you must write it down to say different rhyme schemes in each stanza or the same rhyme scheme throughout the poem. So if it has a fixed rhyme scheme, which means it's not a free verse. But if it has an irregular rhyme scheme, you must now understand that that's a free verse poem. This free verse poem is only found in poems that have irregular rhyme schemes, not poems that have regular rhyme schemes, no, but it's poems that have irregular rhyme schemes. So you must be able to find out what it is. Is the poet written in free verse with no set rhythm? And what is the effect of that? Does the poem have a particular shape or an unusual layout? Why do you think the poem has done this? What is the reason for them doing that? You must be able to bring it out. Is it giving a description of people, things, events, or thoughts? Is it to make you admire? Is it to make you criticize? Is it to mock? Is it to show the irony of it? So you must be able to understand these things. What are those things? Give an outline. Is it funny, serious, humorous, and all those things? So you must be able to find out. Is it warm? Is it generous? Is it savage? Cutting somewhere in between. The theme refers to an important idea that underlines the poem and gives a comment about life. What is the theme of the poem? Think about what you have learned by reading the poem. What is it trying to teach you? What is it trying to say? What is his intention? What is it trying to make you do? So those are the things that we're talking about. So as a result, we are bringing in these things so that we can be able to see them when we are now starting the full poetry, full-fledged of the 10 poems. But for us to enjoy the 10 poems, that's why we have to come to the background, have a proper foundation and say, these are the things that we are doing. Poetic techniques. These are some of the devices poets use to create pictures in your mind, imagery to bring a poem to life. Alliteration, onomatopoeia, simile, metaphor, personification. So those are the things that we are talking about. Right. So as a result, bring everything together. That's why I'm saying you do those activities and say, when I'm doing these activities, I must be able to know what I'm talking about. I must be able to practice them before I can be having a poem in front of me. Right. These are words and phrases that will help you to express some of your poetry's elusive qualities. When we say the poem evokes, we mean that it calls up a memory or feeling about something. So when we say the word diction that is used evokes a sense of freedom, amandla, salute, that word evokes a sense of freedom. Bayete. So that's what we mean. When we say there's a word that is used that say it alludes to, we mean that it makes reference or refers to. So as a result, the sound of the running water or the sound alludes to the running water, and therefore the trickling alludes to the running water. So you're saying it refers to. Elicits is the next word. It's to give rise to, call forth. So we have to be using these words in our poetry because that's the language of poetry. It's a comparison elicits our sympathy. The comparison elicits our sympathies. That's what we mean. Suggests, puts forward for consideration. The image suggests the passing of time. Has connotations of, associated with. The word has connotations of defiance. When someone says no, that has connotations of defiance. So as a result, we must be clear. But it has denotations of a refusal, but it has connotations of defiance. Conveys is another word. It carries a meaning of. The simile conveys a sense of generosity. Implies, it suggests, but does not state obviously. The metaphor implies a life of suffering and hardship. So these are the terminologies of words and the meanings. We gave examples for you so that you can be using them and remembering it most of the times. This is how we're going to analyze a poem. To analyze a poem properly, you have to pay attention to the following aspects. So let's go deeper into the essay on the analysis of poem and look at the title. There are two things in a poem. We have what we call the literal meaning of the poem, which means this poem is based on the war, and therefore the literal meaning is the effects, tragical effects of a war. But there's a poem that deals with the crying of the babies, that deals with the mourning of the mothers. That is where now, that is not a literal meaning, but a symbolic meaning or an underlying meaning. And as a result, that's a figurative meaning, which means it's talking about the loss during war. So we must be able to pay heed to the vocabulary used. Make a list of unknown words and phrases. You are allowed because we're studying the poem. Check the meaning of words that are used a lot. But remember, some texts may have had a different meaning a century ago. So use the internet to look up anything that is not clear. People and places and any cultural relevance of the time should be researched to get a deeper look at the poet's attitude towards the piece. Patterns might become visible at this point and may be the theme of the poem. Then we have the structure of the poem, as we talked about. How many stanzas does it have? What does each stanza discuss? How do the stanzas relate to each other? Can you see formal separations? What logical sense does it have? Is there any emotional sense that can be evaluated? Does having a strict format say anything about the poet, a disciplined poet, an older person? Because an older person, remember, they do not experiment in poetry. They will give it straight and that's it. But a younger person will now start with a different style, change styles because they're experimenting in poetry. So that's very important for us to grasp. Also, failing to have a strict structure, does this reveal something? So these are the things that we must be able to identify. So let's make sure that when we're studying our poem, we remember these things. So as a result, let's go to the purpose of the poem. I'm going to the purpose of the poem next. The subject of the poem can help identify the purpose. That's very clear. When we look at the subject of the poem, it can help us identify the purpose, as this is usually what the poet is describing. The theme can be identified also. What does it say about the work? Are there any links between the theme and the subject, and what can be analyzed from that? Time frame is also an important factor to consider. For example, the poet's goal back when it was written may have changed, but why would they have been changed? So those are the things that we're talking about when talking about the purpose of the poem. So we must be able to find these things. Language and imagery. Language is the diction. I'll keep repeating. Diction must be found. Is there a literal meaning or is there a figurative meaning? Symbolism, figures of speech is what we call connotative meaning. So as a result, let's look at these things and find out what they do. Imagery is what we call visual imagery. There are words that will paint a picture in your mind. So those words, they will help you to analyze the text. So as a result, you must be able to say, when he uses the moon, you must know this is during the evening. So it's not during the day. And therefore, we see the mental picture of the paleness of the moon against the stars. And therefore, a vivid image is painted. Symbols. So when looking for symbolism, something stands for something. Symbolism is an object is used to stand for something. So as a result, non-physical entities, emotion, concept, a bird flying through the air can be seen as freedom and escaping usual conforms. A bird usually symbolizes confinement in a cage, usually uses confinement, so we must be clear. As I said, poetic devices are our imagery and figures of speech. So as a result, our metaphors, our similes, our personification, alliteration, and all those things that we did, hyperbole, are those things that we call poetic devices. So as a result, those are some of the things that we're talking about. Fortunately, we cannot go to all of them. So as a result, we are going to move on to writing a poetry essay next, which will be in the next lesson, so that we can be able to incorporate these things. When we're writing all these things, that's when we're going to bring these elements that we talked about above. So all of these things we talked about are going to come in handy When a poem is brought to you in class, and then the teacher says, we are doing this poem, we have to analyze it. When you are researching, look at the structure of the poem. What structure is in this sonnet 130? What structure is in a young man's thoughts before June the 16th? What type of poem is it? What is the tone? What is the mood? So those are the things that you must be coming up with. With that said, let's prepare our foundation to analyze a poem by introducing poetry properly, by knowing the terminologies, by knowing the key terms, by knowing the figures of speech, by knowing the imagery, by knowing the tone, the mood, and the intention and the themes. And then you'll be ready to study the poem that is given to you 10 times over. Remember, we're doing 10 poems in 10 and 11, so which means you'll have to do it 10 times over and over again. It's the same thing, but it gets easier as you internalize your introduction to the poetry, and you'll be able to spot them a mile away and say, in stanza 3, we have a simile. In stanza 5, we have hyperbole. And therefore, that's how we study poetry. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see each other in the next lesson.